so I'm doing South Sudan, and the population of South Sudan is 11,090,104, and the population of Sudan, or Northern Sudan, is 34,847,910. Northern Sudan's religions are mainly Sunni Muslim and a little bit of Christianity, and South Sudan is animist and mostly Christian. I'm going to talk about the Second Sudanese War and the Lost Boys. So, a war is a conflict that often leads to economic, political, and social disruption. These disruptions occurred during a conflict between North and South Sudan, but it had the greatest impact on the civilians. During this conflict, many young boys were forced out of their villages and away from their families, making them trek thousands of miles through Africa to find a safe place. These boys are referred to as the Lost Boys of Sudan. Along the way, the boys faced many struggles, including dehydration, starvation, wild animals, and scorching temperatures. Thousands of them died along the journey, but the ones who survived had to live with the memories of the horrible things they witnessed. Since the mid-1980s, Sudan has been involved in a civil war fueled by ethnic, religious, and regional strife. This war is a continuation of the First Sudanese Civil War. That was from 1955 to 1972. The Second Sudanese Civil War was a conflict between the Central Sudanese government and the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or for the most part, North and South Sudan. Northern Sudan is about 2/3 of Sudan's total land and population. The majority of North Sudan is Muslim and Arabic speaking, whereas South Sudan is more Native African in customs, language, and has a religion of mainly Christianity. This difference in tradition and religion causes tension between the two places. Another important factor is South Sudan's natural resources. The South is rich in oil and is near the Nile River, and is much more fertile than the North. This caused North Sudan to want to control South Sudan. Without these resources and without this large waterway, North Sudan was not thriving as much as the South. This was the main factor to the conflict. The Second Civil War began in 1983 when the North Sudanese president implemented a law that strictly regulated things such as crime, politics, economics, and many other personal matters. In 1989, however, the two governments reached a peace agreement. This did not last for long because on June 30th, 1989, a military coup overthrew the Sudanese government and nullified the agreement. After this, the North Sudanese government was determined to take over South Sudan. Islamic forces from the north began to destroy entire villages one by one. This conflict has impacted the people of Sudan greatly and led to social issues. These groups, led by the government, would surround villages and enclose them in a ring of fire. The fire would move inwards, totally destroying the villages. This made it very difficult for the people to escape these attacks. The attackers also came in with tanks and machine guns to try and kill the remaining people. The attackers were known as the Janjaweed. During these attacks, they would also try to kill or capture as many people as possible. They wanted the women for slaves and would try to kill all the men and boys. The younger boys were told to flee as soon as the attacks started. The families would scream and inform the boys, "Your dad will protect the family. It's your job to survive, so run." Boys as young as 3 years old would flee and watch as their village burned to the ground, and they were left orphaned. In search of safety, the boys would begin to head east, away from the attackers, to find shelter and safety. There were so many boys that were left alone that eventually they would cross paths and join together. The boys began to care for each other and trek across Africa in groups of over 100 people. They knew they had to stay together and care for each other in order to survive starvation, dehydration, wild animals, and the extreme temperatures. They walked for over 1,000 miles. That's about the distance from Santa Barbara to Albuquerque, New Mexico. As they headed east, many boys died. Other boys would have to bury their companions. This was a traumatizing experience that stuck with them. After months of walking, they reached Ethiopia, where there was a refugee camp set up. There are about 2,000 boys who survived the walk and joined together at the refugee camp. They began to create a small village of their own, where they built huts and did chores such as cooking, cleaning, and even teaching. The boys were eager for knowledge and made a school system. The workers at the refugee camp taught them how to read and write in the dirt because no supplies were available. The Ethiopians had accepted the boys as part of their country until the North Sudanese government overthrew the Ethiopian government. Almost immediately after this happened, they urged an attack on the refugee camp. They quickly invaded the camp and began shooting at the unarmed boys. The boys quickly realized there was only one way out. They were chased for miles to the edge of the Gio River. It was rapidly moving and infested with crocodiles. They kept shooting, and they either had to cross the river or face certain death. The only problem was, this river was moving very rapidly, and many of the boys didn't know how to swim. All the boys watched as their brothers died. Maluau, a lost boy, recalls his experience and says, "The river was very deep and full of crocodiles, but when you heard the machine guns, you jumped in the river. You just jumped in and swam very fast. You just did it." This was a traumatizing experience for all the boys who lived. More than 5,000 boys died in this encounter. Those who lived began to walk again to a place on the Sudan side of the border. They went months with no water, and if they were lucky, they may find a kernel of corn that they would make last for a day or two. They were then faced with many attacks and were led to another refugee camp in Kakuma in Kenya, where they were treated very poorly there because they were outsiders who didn't belong in that country, although this is the safest place they had been in 5 years. This event left the people of Sudan traumatized. They were left alone with nothing but their brothers and their faith. One of the lost boys said he was lost from his parents, but not from God. This civil war lasted 22 years and left the country of Sudan destroyed. The government is corrupt and the people don't want to return. The civil war destroyed southern Sudan's culture and villages. After this experience, they don't look to their country as home. Only about half of the original boys survived, and most of them don't even know their real age. This conflict destroyed the civilians of South Sudan by taking their families, orphaning many boys, and destroying their villages. And just for closure, I want to tell you about what happened to the boys after they made it to Kenya. In Kenya, the boys were so eager to learn, so America began taking boys to the U.S. They were put through an application process, and they were selected in groups to come to the United States. Many described these boys as lost in time. They had never seen a fork or a knife, let alone a plane. A CBS clip really describes this. Before they took off for their new lives in the new world, Sasha Chanoff, a teacher from Boston, gave them a crash course called America 101. He asked them things such as, "Does anyone know who the president in the U.S. is now?" Someone replied, "George Bush, Washington." They were faced with things that they couldn't imagine, like winter. Chanoff said, "This is a little what winter in America feels like." He hands them a block of ice and snow. "It's very cold," someone replied. "Will you die because of that coolness?" "No, you will not die because of the coolness." They were overwhelmed by the new experience, but they were given jobs and apartments where they thrived as more and more boys were being selected to join them. Thank you.